Stop motion is where a group of images come together to create the impression of movement. The first use of stop motion was done by Albert E. Smith and J. Stuart Blackton. They did this by making the Humpty Dumpty Circus in 1898. Then 35 years after this, Willis O'Brien created a stop-motion animation called The Lost World that included 49 prehistoric animals in stop motion. This was a huge change in stop-motion history. Stop motion uses a variety of techniques such as persistence of vision, stop frames, frame rates, and movement of models. These were developed by Joseph Plateau, George Pal, Willis O'Brien, and Lotte Reiniger. The brothers Quay and Mikey Please. Stop motion created the idea of an optical illusion whereby multiple images come together to trick the mind into believing that it's just one image. Joseph Plateau was the first person to show the illusion of a moving image. For him to do this, he used counter-rotating discs with repeating drawn images in small increases of motion on one and regular space slits in the other. He called this device, which was created in 1832, for the phoneticoscope. The phoneticoscope used the persistence of vision to create an illusion of motion. Joseph Plateau was the first to realise that a frame rate of at least 16 images per second was needed for a sense of continuous motion, and that there had to be a gap between images for a perfect illusion. After this, George Pal then realised you didn't have to just use images or people, but you could also use handmade objects. George was a Hungarian animator and film producer. He invented the Pal doll, better known as Puppetoons. The Puppetoons were wooden dolls with flexible arms and legs. This was important to stop motion because it made what was happening on screen more exciting and realistic to watch. It also showed that stop motion could be done using objects as well as images. In the 1940s, Pal made a series called Puppetoons, which was an animation using wooden puppets in a stop-motion animation technique. This showed the movement of the model puppets, creating the effect of movement. Willis O'Brien was a stop-motion animator and special effects worker on stop motion who developed this technique further. He worked on the films The Lost World and King Kong, which were the most popular productions of which he helped produce. King Kong was also one of the biggest stop-motion pictures in the industry. It took the techniques of stop motion to a different level in that time. With their use of the creatures and the way they made King Kong move was something that hadn't been seen before. Although the movement of the gorilla is a bit jumpy, it is still a very good piece of stop motion. From looking at these two examples of stop motion, we can see how different these are. From image to now movement of handmade models. When he first started out making short films, O'Brien created his own characters out of clay, but as he progressed, he began to hire people to help create more complex and detailed characters and models from his own designs. This was done with rubber skin built up over metal armatures. He was also able to create the illusion of breathing by placing a bladder inside the model, which could then be inflated and deflated. This helped to make the characters in his films look more realistic and also quite clever. So, as we can see from this already, O'Brien's work has progressed from Pal's quite a bit due to the use of realistic movements in the models, as we can see. O'Brien also developed the amount of frame rates per minute in his film King Kong by doing 1,440 frames per minute. We then move on to Lotte Reiniger, who also progressed on the image rates with her productions. Lotte Reiniger was a film director and the leading pioneer for silhouette animation. Reiniger made over 40 films over her career. Her most well-known films are The Magic Flute and The Adventures of Prince Ahmed, of which she achieved international recognition for. Reiniger spent 3 years working on this, cutting out and photographing 24 pictures for every second of the film, which eventually resulted in a 66-minute product using around 100,000 cut-out silhouettes. The silhouettes were made from paper and each consisted of a different movement. Lotte's animation skills progressed from pioneers such as Joseph Plateau, as instead of having a few pictures of movement repeating itself round and round, Reiniger was able to take it off paper and create a scene and atmosphere for the characters and also a story. We can see the progress of development when we put the two next to each other, from Plateau's still images to Reiniger's take on silhouette with different use of colour as well. She also used a lot more images which lasted a lot longer. We then move on to identical twins Stephen and Timothy Quay, who are mostly known as his brothers Quay. The brothers studied at the Royal College of Art, London, after studying illustration and film at the Philadelphia College of Art. It was in England where they made their first short films. These brothers progressed stop-motion puppet animation by experimenting with what they could do with it for over 30 years. They managed to produce over 45 moving image productions inspired by various animators, artists, and writers from Central Europe. Most of their animation films feature puppets made of doll parts and other organic and inorganic materials, often partially disassembled in a dark, moody atmosphere. The puppets which they use is a very iconic object to their productions, as they use it in most of them and so have progressed from the gorilla in King Kong in comparison to the movement of their puppets. The puppets in their productions move with much more fluidity and character. Their work has also progressed from earlier developers such as Willis O'Brien, as it was a unique take on stop motion and one that hadn't been seen or made before. The way in which it looks was strange, and also they used a higher amount of frames per second, doing 25, which was one higher than Lotte Ranger and Willis O'Brien. Another stop-motion animator who has won plenty of awards for his creations is Mikey Please. Please is a London-based animation writer and director. His idea film, The Eagle Man Stag, premiered at the 2011 Sundance Film Festival and then went on to win a BAFTA and numerous other awards. Mikey has progressed the narrative of stop-motion a long way, as his productions are very different and a bit wacky. Compared to pioneer George Pal, who creates some comedic and normalish animation, Mikey isn't close to being compared to his as one in common. For example, George's Tulips Shall Grow was a short animation which was based loosely on the events that was happening between Germany and the Netherlands, whereas Mikey's animation aren't based on anything that's happening in real life, and instead are more in-depth in something that isn't real. As we can see when we put the two side by side how different each are. The narrative of Please's productions are very different and not one that you would see every day. They are very imaginative and contain characters, some made up and some real, with odd storylines. A lot of Please's productions don't contain a lot of colour visually either, and consist of a completely different atmosphere and look from the narrative. Please's animation creatures and characters are mostly made from foam. This has also progressed from previous pioneers and animators, as most of them used wood and paper, whereas now Mikey has shown that you can use any type of material and make it what you want. Stop motion can be distributed in many different ways and forms, for example, DVD, TV, and the internet, social media. But before the progression of technology and the internet, the first stop motion productions were first seen at cinemas, but as time progressed and stop motion popularised, it was able to be distributed on DVDs, videos, and TV on social media sites such as YouTube. Stop motion can also be used for TV adverts, music videos, and TV idents. For example, this Honda advert was created by Pez. In this advert, all the images were hand-drawn and was shot practically. Another example would be the music video Ready, Able by Grizzly Bear. They used the material Play-Doh to morph into different shapes and colours. This gives animators a chance for their work to be previewed by people all over the world and also helps to get their production noticed. So, as we can see, stop motion has progressed massively over time, from one of the first being Joseph Plateau's Phenakistoscope to Michael Please's foam animation characters living in a whole different setting and atmosphere. Stop motion has also progressed the Hollywood and UK film industry, as it is becoming more and more popular and featuring in films such as Wes Anderson's Fantastic Mr. Fox and Tim Burton's Corpse Bride.